Richard Nixon. 10 weird facts you didn't know. When you hear the name Richard Nixon, what comes to mind? Watergate, his resignation from the presidency. While those events undoubtedly defined his legacy, there's much more to the story of this enigmatic figure. Nixon's life was filled with strange moments, odd quirks, and surprising decisions that you might not have heard of. So, buckle up, because we're diving into 10 weird facts about Richard Nixon that'll make you rethink everything you thought you knew about the 37th President of the United States. 10. Richard Nixon was a member of the Chicken Gang. Before he was president, Nixon made a name for himself in politics during his time in the House of Representatives and the Senate. But did you know he was also a member of a weird, unofficial club known as the Chicken Gang? This bizarre group, made up of a small handful of political players, earned its name because of their unusual habit of playing poker together and indulging in, you guessed it, eating fried chicken. Nixon's membership in the group was never much of a secret, but it certainly wasn't a widely talked about part of his career. The Chicken Gang became something of a political rite of passage for those looking to make connections and climb the political ladder. While it may sound like a fun pastime, it showed just how much Nixon was willing to mix business and pleasure, and how strange the politics of the time really were. 9. He had a phobia of cats. Most people think of Nixon as a tough, hard-nosed politician, but did you know that he had an irrational fear of cats? Nixon was actually quite terrified of felines, which was an oddity considering his calm, collected public persona. The story goes that, as a child, Nixon was scratched by a cat, which led to a lifelong fear of them. While this might not have been widely known during his time in office, it's a quirky fact about Nixon that's too weird to ignore. Can you imagine a presidential figure shaking hands with world leaders and then recoiling at the sight of a fluffy tabby? 8. Nixon had a secret room in the White House for quiet time. Nixon was known for his workaholic nature, but his need for solitude went beyond just having an office. He had a secret room built in the White House where he would retreat for quiet time. This room wasn't for meetings, speeches, or strategy. It was simply a place for Nixon to decompress and get away from the pressures of running the country. The room was kept under wraps for a long time, and most people in the White House had no idea it existed. But Nixon's staff knew that, when he disappeared for long stretches, he was retreating to this private space to recharge. Considering how intense his job was, it makes sense that Nixon would need a place to clear his head, though a secret quiet room definitely adds an odd layer to his persona. 7. Nixon was obsessed with tapes. One of the most well-known aspects of Nixon's presidency was the infamous tapes that led to his downfall during the Watergate scandal. But did you know that Nixon's obsession with tapes started long before the scandal? Nixon had a strange habit of recording virtually everything: meetings, phone calls, and even his personal thoughts. This was part of a broader push to document everything, but it turned into a bit of a political nightmare when the tapes later became evidence in the Watergate hearings. What's even weirder is that, at times, Nixon's tapes would catch him in private moments of frustration or paranoia. These tapes became one of the most controversial aspects of his presidency, and the fact that he was so obsessed with documenting everything reflects how much control he craved. 6. He was a major fan of the TV show The Twilight Zone. Richard Nixon wasn't just a political animal, he also had a soft spot for pop culture. One of his favorite TV shows was the science fiction classic The Twilight Zone. He was reportedly a big fan of the show's eerie, unpredictable plotlines and strange twists. Nixon's fascination with The Twilight Zone isn't just an odd trivia fact. It also speaks to the unpredictability and paranoia that marked much of his presidency. Maybe it was the unsettling atmosphere of the show that spoke to his sense of unease about the world. Who would have thought that Nixon, the architect of one of the most intense political eras in American history, would be watching late-night sci-fi shows in his downtime? 5. Nixon used to play poker with his top advisors, but with a twist. While many politicians bond over golf or other traditional activities, Richard Nixon and his top advisors had a very unique bonding ritual: poker. But Nixon didn't just play the game for fun. He had a habit of making the stakes higher by betting strange things during these poker sessions. For example, it's said that Nixon would often bet trivial items like his favorite cufflinks or his personal belongings. The most bizarre part? Nixon would sometimes wager his own decisions, literally. At one point, he bet a top advisor that he would make a particular political move if he lost the hand. It's almost as though Nixon used poker to manipulate and control his closest circle, keeping things lighthearted on the surface, while secretly weighing huge decisions in the midst of a card game. Or, he hated to lose, and it showed. Richard Nixon's intense dislike of losing is well documented, but the lengths to which he went to avoid losing were sometimes odd and extreme. It wasn't just about winning elections or debates. Nixon hated losing in almost any context. One story goes that Nixon would frequently take a 45-minute drive to a particular gas station to make sure he always won a game of pinball. The game itself was completely random, but Nixon was so obsessed with controlling every aspect of his life that he couldn't stand the idea of walking away without a win, even if it was just a silly arcade game. This obsession with winning, even in the smallest of circumstances, shows how much Nixon's personal insecurities shaped his public life. A president who would go to great lengths just to win a meaningless pinball game certainly had some larger psychological battles going on. 3. Nixon loved classical music, especially Beethoven. If you think of Nixon, the first thing that probably comes to mind isn't his love of classical music, but it was actually one of his lifelong passions. Nixon loved listening to Beethoven, and his favorite piece of music was the Moonlight Sonata. This odd fact about Nixon speaks to a quieter, more introspective side of him that most people didn't get to see. He would often play Beethoven's music to relax and unwind after long days of work. In fact, some say that his love of classical music was one of the few things that could calm him down during the chaotic years of his presidency. 2. Nixon's Checkers speech changed politics forever. In 1952, Richard Nixon gave a speech that would become one of the most famous moments in American political history, his Checkers speech. The speech, which was broadcast live, was meant to defend himself after accusations of financial improprieties. Nixon's emotional plea to the public turned the tide in his favor and helped him keep his spot as Dwight D. Eisenhower's running mate. But here's the weird part. Nixon used a dog, a Cocker Spaniel named Checkers, to win over the public. He passionately argued that the dog was a gift from a supporter and that it would not be returned, no matter what anyone said. It was a strange and unconventional move, but it worked. Nixon's ability to tap into the public's emotions and use a dog to his advantage changed the way American politicians connected with voters. 1. Nixon had a secret agreement with the mafia. This one's a little stranger than most, but it's true. Nixon had a secret agreement with certain members of the mafia. In exchange for political favors, some mafia leaders helped Nixon secure votes in key states during his presidential campaigns. This isn't exactly the kind of thing you'd expect from a U.S. president, but Nixon was known to strike deals with anyone who could help him gain an edge. The mafia connection has been the subject of much speculation and has led to a number of conspiracy theories about Nixon's political dealings. While it's never been fully proven, the possibility of such a shady alliance certainly adds another layer of complexity to Nixon's already controversial legacy. Richard Nixon's life was full of strange decisions, quirky habits, and fascinating facts that most people don't know about. Want to discover more surprising facts about other historical figures? Make sure to watch the next video popping up on your screen.